Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's an honor to have you all. We've got a great turnout tonight. We're here to have great dialogue and discussion about the issues that are facing our country. And so it's my pleasure and privilege to be here with all of you tonight. How many of you tonight believe that your federal taxes are not high enough? How many in this room thinks the federal government isn't spending enough money? How many of you think the federal government should balance its budget? How many of you think the federal government should this week start intervening with troops on the ground or strikes into Syria? No. How many of you think the federal government's out of touch with the American people? Well, it's clear in this country that this federal government is operating in a way that is inconsistent with the wants and desires of the American people. We have people in this room, certainly that are liberals, certainly that are conservatives, certainly that think the president's doing a good job, or certainly think the president's doing a bad job. But in all, we don't like the policy this federal government's moving forward with. No one wants to see their taxes go up. Everybody wants to see the federal budget balanced. And so we're going to have to work together as a country. We're going to have to talk to one another. We're going to have to listen to each other. We've got divided government in this country. We have Republicans running the House and Democrats running the Senate. And that means if anything's going to pass, that both parties are going to have to be part of it. My commitment to all of you is to listen to everybody in this room tonight, whether they're a Democrat, whether they're a Republican, whether they ever voted for me, or whether they think I'm the worst person in Congress. Either way, I'm here to listen to you, here to have a good dialogue and question and answer, and it's really important to me that you're here tonight. Thank you. They don't make members of Congress do town hall meetings. In fact, a lot of members don't do them. I enjoy doing them. I prefer to do them. We've done a lot of town hall meetings since I've been a member of Congress. We always do one in August. We do them throughout the year. We've done some telephone town hall meetings. Who in here has been on one of our telephone town hall meetings? Yeah. If you'd like to make sure we get your number, make sure you sign up. We'll make sure you get in one of the calling pools. That's a good way. We catch people who would never show up here at a town hall meeting. But they're home, they've got kids or something, they can participate. We do a lot of email newsletters. I think folks, how many people are on our email newsletter list? Okay? If you didn't sign up, we've got a sign-up sheet here. We talk about what we're doing, the events that are coming up. We talk about the votes I've made and how I voted on them, and a link to the bill itself, and a link to how other people voted. Sometimes it's hard to get that information out of what's going on in Congress. We put that on our email list. We put that on our Facebook page, we put that on our Twitter page. So there's a lot of different ways to have access. We have a YouTube channel. How many people in here are on Pinterest? Okay, we have a Pinterest page now as well. So whatever mode of communication you want, you can even fax us. We take faxes, letters, emails, calls. We believe in accessibility. That doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but it means that we have good dialogue and communication. I want to ask, how many people in this room are veterans? Let's give a round of applause. How many of the folks in this room are World War II veterans? One, two. All right. I have some staff members here tonight that work for you, work for us. We have an office in Overland Park. We have an office in Washington, D.C. Many of you come through there often. Some of you may have never been there, but that's an opportunity to see us on a regular basis. We deal with all sorts of things. There may be people here tonight that don't have the veterans benefits they were promised. They may have a difficulty in some federal agency that's not responding to their calls or their questions. That's one of the other things we do. Besides voting on legislation and listening and collaborating and trying to find solutions, we have staff that helps that. And the folks that are staff for all of you, could you guys wave your hands in the back? To our staff members, so just the folks so you know who they are. Those are people you can talk to after the meeting, anytime when you need help with something. I also want to make an announcement, a very personal and great announcement in my life. My wife Brooke is here, and we are having our first baby in November. And we're having a little girl, so that'll be exciting. I figure in Washington, D.C., after the last couple of years serving you and hearing all the crying and whining from folks in D.C., and, you know, it's pretty much like raising a baby sometimes. So I figure I'm ready for it. But let me again say it's my honor to represent all of you. Talking about some of our accessibility. Let me tell you, there's some big issues facing our country. You all know that. That's why you're here. I'm very concerned about where we are as a nation. I'm concerned about our national debt. I'm concerned about $17 trillion we're going to pass on to our kids and grandkids. I'm concerned about a country that is the greatest country in the world that can't balance its books. That, to me, is a major failure for this country. I've supported legislation that would balance the budget in 10 years. It may not be the best pathway that everyone in this room agrees with, but getting a pathway to a balanced budget, to me, is important. And I'm going to work with folks in both parties to find that pathway. I believe we've got to focus on reducing spending. I believe we've got to focus on the growth in entitlement spending. I believe we shouldn't touch benefits to current seniors. I believe we should keep the promises to our veterans and to our seniors that we've made. And far too often people in Washington, D.C. make promises and then they come back and years later Congress and the country doesn't support those promises. So we got to keep our promises. But we have the luxury in this country right now of seeing forward 10, 20 years and seeing where things are going. We now know that without changes to our spending patterns in this country, that we'll be paying as much as $800 billion to $1 trillion in debt and interest payments in 10 years from now. That is more than we spend in a single year on our entire national defense. That is more than we spend in a single year on Medicare. More than we spend in a single year on Social Security. That we'll be spending on debt and interest payments, some of which just send interest payments to other countries. So rather, if your concern is, well, I want to see us spend more on certain things, that crowds out spending. Because we can't spend money on roads, and schools, and research if we're spending money on debt and interest payments. We can't keep taxes down if we're doing it. And so that is a crisis that is on its way. And we have the luxury today to avoid severe austerity cuts. We borrow 40 cents out of every dollar. We're cutting 40 cents out of that dollar today. Would be bad for the economy. It would be bad for the people that rely on those services. I don't favor that approach. I favor a smart approach that takes a vision over years in which we hold to our promises and balance those books. And so that's where one of our top focuses is. Also focus on the economy. Our unemployment rate, about 7.5% in this country, is too high. And it's been too high for too long. My belief is that we have to work on job creation in the private sector. Small businesses create 2 out of every 3 jobs in this country, and we've got to support entrepreneurship, innovation, and job creation. Washington, D.C. is not going to create the jobs to save this nation. These jobs aren't going to be created by bureaucrats and some think tank in Washington, D.C. They're going to be created by the hard work and entrepreneurship and innovation of the American people. And that means we need to pursue policies. That means we need to pursue policies that focus on that. I think we have too many regulations in this country. I think every day we see another regulation coming out. We have a book about this big that comes out every day from Washington, D.C., full of new regulations. How do regulations create jobs? So even if you think some of these regulations are a good idea, they're putting new burdens on the people we're asking to create jobs. So if many people's top priority is job creation, we're not going to get there if we're adding new regulations on the economy. I believe we've got to keep taxes down. Tax increases don't create jobs. We have $3 trillion roughly in new taxes coming over the next decade to the American people. We've got $1 trillion coming as part of the Obama health care legislation. We're talking about excise taxes. We're talking about taxes on medical equipment. We're talking about taxes on capital gains. We're talking about taxes on multiple things that added new taxes because of the health care bill. We've got new taxes coming after the first of the year with the fiscal cliff tax increases that occurred. The president ran on and asked for taxes to go up on people in the upper brackets. So taxes went up on folks that making over $400,000. Those taxes went up on the rich. The Bush tax cuts expired for the rich. Everyone else below that kept their same rates. Social Security taxes went up. 4.2% was our rate last year. This year it's 6.2%. All told, that's about $3 trillion in new taxes that are going to hit this economy. Money that could be here, that will be going to Washington, D.C. I don't think that creates jobs back in our communities. I think taxes are high enough in this country, and we've got to expect and demand that Congress and folks in Washington, D.C. work within the dollars they already have. I've had people come up to me and say, look, I'm very conservative. I will pay additional taxes if I have to in order to fix this deficit. But my problem is if I send you more money, you're not going to use it to pay down the debt. You're going to increase spending with it. And that's what Washington has always done. That's why I support a balanced budget amendment. Because we've got to get Congress to do its job and balance its books just like everybody in this room has to do, just like every family has to do. I support reforming Congress. One of the first bills I introduced this year was a bill to eliminate the lifelong pensions that members of Congress receive. Members of Congress do not receive pensions. Then they tried to give up the pension. They said, well, they passed a law that says you have to contribute to the pension in Congress because some members of Congress tried to get out of it, and they didn't want everyone to look bad, so now everyone has to stay in it. So we've got to stop that. I've introduced legislation and supported many bills to cut the salaries of members of Congress. We need to show the American people that we get it, and sacrifice isn't just all talk. We're willing to do it. We've cut our office budget back more than the sequester of anything has cut our office budget. We've sent money back to the Treasury. When was the last time you heard of a federal agency cutting its own budget and sending the money back to the Treasury? One couple hands. It happens apparently every once in a while. It doesn't happen very often. And so we're trying to lead by example. I don't take the health care benefits offered to members of Congress. I don't believe we ought to receive special treatment. I believe that any law that Congress passes ought to apply to themselves and run the American people. We have a lot of issues. We talked a little bit about Syria when I was walking in. We're hearing now that the president's intending to move forward potentially in action in Syria. We don't know who our friends are there. We don't know who our enemies are there. We understand that certainly what Assad is doing is horrible. It's horrific. These are crimes against humanity. But when the United States gets engaged, if we put boots on the ground, if we put men and women in harm's way, if we get involved in this, we don't know when we can get out of it. We're still in Afghanistan. I think this country is fatigued with getting involved in every crisis. And so my request, at least to the president, is to inform Congress, to seek advice and consent of Congress when moving forward. When President Bush went into Iraq and Afghanistan, he had the votes in Congress. They voted for it. They supported it. I think that process ought to work for this as well. And so I'd like the president to come before us and actually have that dialogue and give us an opportunity as the American people to decide what we want to do. And so we'll be looking for that conversation to happen. A lot of other issues facing our country. I want to make sure I get to as many questions as possible. I've given you a little bit of an overview of the things that we're working on, the things I believe in, many other issues before us. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to start taking a few questions. And again, we've got folks on different sides. I want to make sure if you're conservative, if you're someone liberal asking a question, let them ask their question. Don't jeer them or boo them. The opposite. If you're someone liberal and someone conservative, let them ask their question. I want to have good questions. I want to be able to give an answer. And I want to be able to learn from this process. So I appreciate that. And let's go ahead and start. Who's got a first question? Yes, sir, right here. And we'll bring you a microphone.
Wait. I would like to know why the politicians in Washington are listening to La Raza and trying to pass amnesty and give them everything free when we can't even take care of our own, and we can't afford 19 to 30 million more illegal benefits that are earned by Americans. Our veterans are suffering, our senior citizens are suffering, and just about everybody is suffering, but we're going to give everything to the illegals. That's wrong. When are we going to stop talking and take action? We have a attorney general and a president running rampant. Nobody does anything but talk.
Well, sir, I completely agree. I have been frustrated to no end that we can't get answers to the questions you were talking about with all the talk on everything. You said we got President, Attorney General run rampant. I agree with that point specifically, that we have a country and an administration that won't answer our questions. We've been asking questions on Benghazi. We've been asking questions on NSA. We've been asking questions still on Fast and Furious. We can't get answers to all these things. We've held the Attorney General in contempt of Congress already, and we can't get answers from him. And so, we're short of doing everything we can to put pressure on this president. And we're going to continue to do that. Let me answer your question about immigration. I believe that the most important thing, the first thing we need to do when it comes to immigration is be able to uphold the rule of law and our national sovereignty. I recently had a chance to go down to the Mexican-American border, and I had a chance to tour the different states. And I was able to see firsthand, because we have these debates, we talk about secure the border. I want to be able to be your eyes and ears down there and say, this is what we need to do. So I went down, I was in California, Arizona, and Texas. And I can say in California, they've really improved things. In 1991, they had 500,000 arrests at the border between Tijuana and San Diego. Since then, they put in a single line of fencing, then they put in a secondary line of fencing, they put in stadium lights, they use overhead visuals, they use infrared, they use motion sensors. This year so far, they've had 24,000 arrests at the California border. Security makes a difference. You go into Arizona, it's a lot harder terrain, got a lot of mountains, so it's not just one simple border, right? It's a complicated subject. It's not quite as good, but better than it used to be. You go into Texas, wide open. We were down at the Rio Grande. People can come in 24 hours a day in broad daylight. Drugs are being smuggled in by the tons, and no matter what they've built so far, it hasn't been able to do that. But we're going to have to secure the border first. We can't. My biggest concern with immigration reform, one of my biggest concerns is we don't make the mistakes of 1986. My concern is in this country that we incentivize illegal behavior and we actually penalize legal behavior. There's a line of folks that wanted to come into the country legally. We're a nation of immigrants. I want to get wrong. I am not anti-immigration. And we are a nation of immigrants. That's what built this country. It's what helped build the greatest country the world has ever seen. I think if we can bring the best and brightest from around the world here, that's a good thing for the United States. I think when we take people here and we educate them at our universities, like I like to say, our top university, like KU, we educate them here. Okay, K-State is with us. All right, we got to be bipartisan on some things, right? No, not Mizzou, though, right? All right. When we educate them at those universities, and then we send them home to compete with us, that makes no sense. So I want to bring in science, technology, engineering, and math students here. They create jobs. They actually will create jobs in this country that are a net job producer. We need skilled labor. We need agriculture labor. We do need labor options. I know this is a debate, and not everybody in my own party might agree with it. That's okay. But I'm just telling you what I think. I think we do need good legal immigration. So we've got to do a multi-step approach here. We've got to secure the border. We've got to secure ports of entry where people are boating in things and bringing things in that aren't even just at the border itself. We need a good entry-exit visa system. We have a situation now where 40% of the undocumented or illegal immigrants in this country are here because of visa overstays. We don't even know when they leave. So you come here on an education visa, you come here on a work visa, you come here on a travel visa. We never know whether you go home. And so we need that entry-exit system in order to be able to ensure that we keep our nation and our border secure. We also need an interior security provision. When I was down the border, we can do a lot better. It'll never be 100% because people break through the fence, they go over fences, the big tunnels. We saw tunnels where they put train tracks in underneath the fence to be able to put tons of drugs in, send the drugs to the United States, take the guns back out, and send those to Mexico. And so we understand that you're going to build one thing and you're going to need to keep innovating. It's not a one-time solution. It's going to be very complicated. But it's a very important part of this reform. With interior security, I think that if cities and counties and states want to help with immigration enforcement, they ought to be allowed to do so. So I think using a comprehensive approach, we have to be able to assure ourselves that we do those things before we can move forward and do anything about folks that are here illegally. I don't support the Senate bill because I think the Senate bill makes the same mistakes the 1986 bill does. It gives a pathway and never ensures that we have security. We've fallen for that trick before. We're a nation. We use our hearts and our heads. We have compassion. These are families in our communities. It's not very practical, I'll tell you, to just line up a bunch of us and send folks home. We're going to have a solution and a dialogue. And Democrats and Republicans are going to have to be part of that. We figure out what to do with folks that are here. But I can tell you, it's not amnesty, and it's not putting folks on the bus and sending them home either. There's going to have to be a solution where we're practical, and we're human, and we're realistic, and we're caring, loving people. But at the same time, we're going to use our heads, and we're going to say, if we give folks amnesty and we don't secure the border, 10 years from now, we're going to have another 10 million folks here. We can't do that. So I want a solution. I'm not one. My attitude is one of getting yes and getting things done. So I want a solution. And I'm going to do everything I can to figure out how we get to that solution that the American people can get behind that solves this problem. Sir, I appreciate the question. Yes, sir.
Thank you for holding this meeting. And by the way, I didn't look like a legal immigrant, but I am a legal migrant here. I did not go to KU, but I went to K-State because my courses were not offered. I voted for you twice. I'm a registered Republican. The basic question I have, like most of other people also have, after you read the bill, do you vote your conscience or do you vote as a bloc? That's what I see most of the time. Democrats vote like a bloc. So are these people educated, different agendas? How can they all agree on something and most of them don't even read the bills? That that is amazing thing, So that's, you work with your conscience, and congratulations, good things are happening to you in November.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. The question is, do members of Congress spend enough time reading the bills? Do they take time to personally decide, or do they just vote what the party tells them to? Well, I think what we've seen in Washington is a lot of people doing what they're told and not listening to the people, not listening. That's why we get all this bad policy. A lot of times you'll have people tell you, and I got this when I was in the state legislature too, they'll say, I know this is a really bad bill, and we have some of our good state legislators here tonight too. They'll say, I know this is a bad bill, but you gotta vote for it because it's the best thing available. Well, we don't have to settle. They'll tell you, look, if you don't vote tomorrow, then bad things are gonna happen. This is the last train leaving the station. You sit in meetings sometimes where they'll say, either side will say, you gotta vote for this because we gotta win. We gotta beat the other side. Well, at the end of the day, who's losing in that whole thing? The American people. And so I think everyone can do a better job of reading these bills, of ensuring they're talking to their constituents, of knowing the ramifications. Sometimes they say things like, we have to pass this bill to find out what's in the bill. I've never heard that before. So we hear these things, and I think that's why people get frustrated with Congress. And so, sir, I think you're a very good question. We'll continue to do better at that, or work harder, as we all should, to make sure that we're listening and we're thinking about all the unintended consequences and doing the best job we can. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
On that matter of knowing dates and making decisions, part of what's going on in Syria, as you rightly observed earlier, is that we don't know who our friends and who our enemies are over there. And we have a long history of involvement in that region ever since the Truman Doctrine. So how to decide what to do is a matter of information. And we've been hearing a lot of stuff about information lately. You may recall what happened with Edward Snowden being an employee of a private corporation with large stacks of information about America, who is now in Russia, and what's going on in Syria is between us and Russia. Okay, so my point here is, if information is the problem, I wonder how you feel about Senator Moran's efforts to keep the United States out of situations in which the international community is working on their understanding of these arms things that are flowing all over the world. There's a treaty in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that is billed as a protection of the Second Amendment, but it's an unregulated, completely wide open arms traffic all over the world, and the bill is holding our representatives and senators hostage if they even want to consider finding out where these arms are going and how they're getting there and how we end up in these situations. And then please comment on that. And then I'd like to know if, since you're against boots on the ground, are you okay with missiles and drones and other ways of dealing with relationships that we've been in that area? Investments and stuff that's been going on now since the Second World War. What's the answer here? Missiles?
Sure. Well, certainly, thank you for the question. Well, there's lots of light off there. Everybody hear the question? Because I don't think I repeat it all. Let me just say, I think you mentioned the NSA a little bit. I do want to talk about that as part of this. And you mentioned the UN treaties regarding arms trade. Well, I'll say on the Second Amendment, we don't need the UN to tell us what our Second Amendment is. Anytime we start subjecting our authority or giving up some of our autonomy to the UN when it comes to our constitutional rights, you know what's going to happen. They won't protect them as much as we will. They won't care about them as much as we care about them. So we can't subject our amendments to our constitutional rights to the United Nations. And so we do need more information on all of those things, and hopefully that'll provide some of those answers. I will say, you brought up the NSA. How many people believe the NSA should be able to collect our phone records? No. A couple of us. I've been outspoken on this issue. you may have seen, I voted for an amendment on the House floor that would defund the spying program where they collect the phone records of every American. It's called the Mockingbird. I'm also the lead sponsor on a bill called the Email Privacy Act. And what we discovered over the last year or so is that the federal government, way beyond what the NSA says they're doing, has been reading the emails of Americans without a warrant, without probable cause, without any respect for the Fourth Amendment. When asked about this, these agencies have admitted doing it. The IRS says they can read the emails of Americans without probable cause because Americans, quote, have no expectation of privacy when it comes to their email. It's a 1986 law. A lot of things happened in 86. It's a 1986 law called the Electronic Communications Protection Act. And that law says the federal government can read our emails without a warrant as long as they are opened or have been on your server for 180 days and are unopened. So the only ones they can't read are unopened emails less than 180 days. It's stunning, it's staggering. So we've got a bill that's supported by the far left groups to the far right groups and all points in between to say that our emails, our digital communication should have the same Fourth Amendment protections as our personal private mail. It's the same thing. And that bill, by the way, is a great example of bipartisanship. We have about 150 co-sponsors. I've got a Democratic co-sponsor who is the lead sponsor and many other Democratic sponsors along the way. That's a bill we can actually get passed in this Congress. It's actually supported in the Senate by the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Pat Leahy, the Democrat, and Mike Lee, the Leahy-Lee bill. This is the kind of stuff we can get done. And so we've got to protect the Fourth Amendment rights of American citizens. Now, you also asked a question about Syria or about these conflicts. I don't want to engage militarily at all. But I certainly would like to be consulted, and I certainly think the American people should be consulted before missiles start firing in their name. And that's why we're doing it. Let's try to go back here a little bit, those ways. Yes, sir, in the red here.
I want to thank you for taking my question. Also, I want to thank your office for helping. Stranger talking case of I wanted to, first of all, thank you for the help that you provided our family on a matter of stranger talking case. And you guys do a good job, your officers, and some good work for us. Appreciate that help. I did want to comment, I'm probably unpopular. I'm a business owner. I started 2 companies and have, first one was in 22 years ago and operate both of them. I wanted to say that a lot of the talk that seems to be coming out of Washington right now, where particularly Republicans are looking at trying to shut down the government and shut down or not raise the debt ceiling in order to stop funding help the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. To me, that seems a bit irresponsible, and I believe that if we want to change things, the best thing that we can do as a country is try to pick and make some changes that are meaningful and not just, I haven't heard any I've heard we need to defund Obamacare and start over, but I haven't heard what we're going to replace it with. And I'm personally going to benefit from Obamacare because I've been on the private insurance market for a number of years. And in 2008, I had an accident, fell 26 feet on the concrete, and my pelvis was broken. And I was essentially unable to get out and about. And I was late making my insurance payment by 3 days, and I was canceled. And then after that, I had a pre-existing condition. So I've been unable to purchase insurance for the last 5 years. So I've got, for the first time in my life, to find out what it's like if you don't have insurance. I'm in a position, fortunately, to pay for my own care. But The existing system that we have has been broken for a while, and we need to fix it. But we pay twice as much as a nation per capita, and as a portion of our growth and our GDP on healthcare as the average of all the other developed nations, and yet we get our outcomes are somewhere towards the bottom of that group. So my question to you is, are you going to support this effort to essentially shut down the government, or are you going to go ahead and try to work and work constructively? What do you do?
Certainly, sir, I appreciate the question. And the healthcare bill is one that divides us as a country, both on political lines and on personal stories. And certainly, all our sympathies go to 26 fall onto the pavement. I'm sure that was very tough for you. And I do mean, we all in our families have healthcare issues that come up that other folks may not know about or may not understand the struggles that we go through. And so I'm certainly very sympathetic to the challenges that we face as a country when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to an individual basis. I don't believe we should shut down the federal government. I do believe we should defund portions or delay portions of the life. I think there are portions of the bill that may be very good for certain individuals, but as a whole, the bill is a bad deal for the American people. No. And I know people disagree. How many people would like to see us defund or delay the Obama health care bill? So certainly this country is divided on the subject. But my goal, sir, to your question, is to, if we're not able to delay, if we're not able to defund portions of it, which I pledge my support to do, is to either way come up with better solutions than we have right now. I don't think the status quo in healthcare is acceptable in this country. I think that everybody ought to have an opportunity to be able to afford to provide health care, to have an opportunity to buy coverage. And so I don't like where the status quo is either. We've got to do something for people with pre-existing conditions. We've got to make sure that if you get sick or something happens to you, that you have an opportunity to do something. I favor something more along the lines of high-risk pools. I think that's a better option. But I will tell you, there are other options on the table we ought to be discussing. One of my biggest challenges with the health care bill is that it didn't have the opportunity to have bipartisan debate and support. And we're going to have working together to get there. So that's my commitment. So we're going to have working together to get to a solution. We're going to come over to this other room. But I will say there are a lot of ideas out there. People call us with them. We debate them. We have bills on them. I think we need health savings accounts. I think we need medical malpractice reform. I think we need bills that have better competition. I think ultimately the problem with the health care bill is it's not going to make health care more affordable in this country. It's going to create a lack of access in this country. In 2020, there's a 91,000 doctor shortage in this country. Primary care physicians are short. And the saddest, ironic part about the whole thing that's so sad is that the people who really need our help, they're the ones who get hurt the most when the government gets involved in this. If we get a two-tier system where we have a single payer and the government runs it, guess who's still going to be able to afford their health care? The rich. Who's not going to be helped are the folks at the bottom end. And when we have a doctor shortage in this country, guess who's not going to be able to get in to see their doctor? The people who've got lots of money or the people who are on Medicaid? So these shortages hurt the people who need our help the most. And so ultimately, we can do better than that health care bill. And we're going to do everything we can to fix that.
Sorry. My question is fairly simple. I was concerned about our deficits. I'm concerned about immigration. But I'm most concerned about us getting into new wars.
The new wars, sir?
Yeah, the new wars, whether they be in Syria or Iran. Long ago, I had a great deal of expertise with some of these terrible weapons because they used to be very popular among at least theoreticians. If we attack Syria, disable that government, who gets the tens of thousands of tons of nerve gas? If we attack or help another country attack Iran, who's going to get all those nuclear weapon expertise? Without U.S. troops on the ground to secure these facilities, they're just going to go all over the world. And when we talk about, we're upset about the NSA, you have nerve gas popping off in the United States or a nuclear weapon somewhere, nobody's going to care about their freedoms anymore. They're going to be hearing about these terrible weapons that have been allowed to proliferate.
Well, I appreciate the comment. I guess your question is what I think about that point, I guess. Well, right. Yeah, the comments over here, another gentleman just said, we need to have a policy in place before we decide when we're going to jump and get involved in these situations. I think one of the best policies is we have to decide whether it affects the security and safety of the American people. I think that's the standard that we can use to start. Out there in the purple polo shirt. There. Gentlemen, yes, right there.
Everybody hear me okay? My question is, right now, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, there's a lot of disagreement, there's a lot of angst among a lot of folks in here. We all elect people like Congressman Yoder, we elected Barack Obama to be our president, but the thing that gets me that nobody gets upset about, and Congressman Yoder, I want you to dig into this a little bit, is all these unelected bureaucrats at all these agencies that create all these rules for us that we have to have the same plywood as California. We're Kansas, we can do things better. And Congressman Yoder, I know you support the 10th Amendment very strongly, but what can we do as citizens to fight back against all these bureaucratic monstrosities that are being created?
I appreciate the question. I certainly agree. One of my frustrations has been we have been able to block some of the efforts of this administration to do cap and trade. And the president will come on national TV and say, we'll just do it through the regulatory side. Anytime we say that something that the House doesn't support, the House is elected every 2 years, and they are the democratically elected, voice of the United States House, voice of the people. But anytime they speak, the president says, well, we can find a regulation or a rule to do it if the House won't do it. And that is the worst way to form legislation. Not only do you not have a chance, there's no bureaucrat up here to ask questions who are held accountable, right? They're not here before you. So that you don't have a chance to hold them accountable. They also don't have the opportunity to understand what the response to the regulations will be. We had the EPA in front of us, and someone asked the EPA, do you take into consideration job creation at all, or the economy, when you put forward a rule and regulation? They said no, it's not in our mandate. And so they don't have to take in. So when I'm having to vote, I got to take in all those factors. I got to think about people, write in and tell us. I got to think about constituents. I got to think about the policy implications both on the environment and the economy. Those regulatory agencies just have to worry about their own angle. I've never had a regulator come in and say, you know what, we have too much authority. You should dial back our regulations a little bit. They've always tried to expand the regulations. They always invent additional ways to target and regulate the American people. And I get it. There are some, we're not going to live regulation free. There are some regulations that are important. There are some regulations that make a difference for whether it's clean air, clean drinking water, those types of things. But we're in a situation right now where regulations are coming so fast and so hard. They're hurting business, they're hurting job growth, they're hurting this economy, they're hurting the American people. And so my pledge is to do everything I can to roll back some of that authority when we have the opportunity to do so. Too often we say things like, we got to pass the bill to find out what's in it. And what that really means is we're going to let the regulatory agencies who haven't been elected or are unaccountable write the rules and regulations that affect hundreds of millions of Americans when it comes to their health care. That's wrong. We need to stand up and speak out about that. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. First of all, I think it is great that you do these. We know you don't have to, and I think it's very valuable. When I first came in, I sat down next to Mr. Head right here. He was one of the World War II veterans who raised his hands. And I'm wearing a New York City shirt, if you can't tell. And he told me he lived there for a while, and that several years ago, you could buy a steak for $1.43 at a restaurant in Manhattan. I think we all know that that's unrealistic right now, but I think a lot of people don't really know why, and it's because of the Federal Reserve. And I know that you co-sponsor audit the Fed bills, but I want to know if you would be willing to sponsor or co-sponsor a bill that completely takes away any authority the Fed has to operate.
First of all, this man is World War II man. You're good because you're sitting next to him. When was a steak $1.40?
70 years ago.
1955. I'll look around. Well, I know many people in this room, many people in this country are concerned the Federal Reserve has too much power and too much authority in their mandate to regulate the commerce in this country and the monetary policy when it comes to interest rates, printing money. The Federal Reserve now controls the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. The Congress has given them even more power to fund things directly. We have a Kansas City Fed here. We've had some pretty good Fed chairmen, I think, with Tom Honey, now Esther George, who I think have been dissenting on a lot of these votes in New York City. I have sponsored a bill to audit the Fed so we know that when there's bailouts or when there's these things, we know where the money went, we know where it goes, because the Fed isn't some independent government. The Fed is part of the American governmental system. They have to be responsive still to the American people. So I don't know if I can fully agree with your question, sir, but I would love to hear and seek thoughts and ideas about what it would look like, what the economy would look like, and how that would work if the Fed were removed. And it would be a good dialogue to have. Do you know if there's a bill that's been introduced to do that?
Beyond audit?
Yeah, beyond audit. Okay. Well, I would love to dialogue with you. I know there's some others that find that very passionate. Let's have a conversation and see what the best pathway is going forward. I certainly appreciate the question. Yes, okay.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make a quick reference to the man who spoke earlier about health insurance. I lived in Germany for 18 years, and I enjoy the benefits of living under universal health care in a country that offered universal health care. I'm really disheartened by the misinformation that is being put out there. I've had several incidents where I had to rely on the healthcare system there. I had massive surgery in 2002. I was in the hospital for 5 weeks. I was on sick leave for 6 months thereafter. I had a $44 copay. I lived in Berlin, Germany, and they flew my surgeon, a world-renowned surgeon, from Munich to Berlin, all for 11% of my income. Your income, 11% is what you pay. It might be 13% now. A percentage of your income pays for your insurance. It is not raised, irrespective of any physical ailments or pre-existing conditions. Throughout your lifetime, it is always a fixed percentage. Okay, well, I thought everyone else had a lot of time to speak as well. In any case, you said earlier that you would be willing to consider other options, that you're not too hot, obviously, on the Obamacare Affordable Care Act, and that you're looking at other ways. I would like to know, why is it that it's always a direction, or everyone takes a look at private or for-profit private insurers to insure us, whereas it's proven elsewhere in all other industrialized nations that that is not the route.
First of all, thank you for your question, because part of this is to hear opinions, and there are opinions on both sides, certainly, and this country is very divided. So your opinion is certainly a valid one, and one that I'm here to listen to. I don't support a single-payer government-run system. I understand that there may be, particularly in cases you've decided, that there may have been certainly some benefits in terms of coverage, but I think ultimately the access is not better, the opportunities are not better for folks, and it costs more, and so I appreciate your certainly question. I certainly know folks are shouting at me right now, but I believe very strongly that our healthcare will be better run if we can create more competition and more individual control over their healthcare between the patient and the hospital. I don't want bureaucrats getting into the doctor's office more than they already are, by the way. And so having the iPad, which comes in and starts rationing care and cutting down care with the Independent Payment Advisory Board, is going to hurt seniors. And so I don't support that. I don't support those provisions of the healthcare bill.
Insurance
But I certainly
companies
believe,
do that.
I certainly believe, if you'll let me answer a question, others can please feel free to ask a question how they're injured. I certainly believe that we've got to do better than the system we currently have. And there may be parts of other systems that would work well in the United States system. But I think most of the American people appreciate the system we have in this country. And the ones that it isn't working for, we've got to fix it for them without ruining it for the rest of the country.
Thank you for taking my question. For everyone here, I'm a veteran, federal employee, and for Congressman Yoder, Hamdakai.
All right. Brother.
Okay, question one was going to be the Affordable Care Act. I'll skip that and go to question two. First couple of points, 1986, Ronald Reagan was president, and the Bush tax cuts were passed under reconciliation in 2001 and 2003. So it's not unprecedented that the Affordable Care Act, something got passed under reconciliation. But my question is on the debt ceiling. Okay, the debt ceiling is basically authorization to pay the bills that Congress already authorized spending the money on. So we bought that aircraft carrier. So why is there another law that says, okay, we bought it, now we have to pay for it? And tying it back in Affordable Care Act, do you believe that shutting down the government with for the Affordable Care Act over the debt ceiling? That was a clear question, but
I think you get that. Let me answer that first. Again, as I said earlier, I don't support shutting down the government. I do support defunding the Obama health care. I appreciate the question. Let me answer the first part of your question. Certainly, we have passed legislation with, I guess you're in the first part, with reconciliation, where one party has done something. But if you look at some of our best reforms, I'm a fan of two parties working together to solve things. I think you actually get something that the majority of the country can support. And so when you look at the 1980s, you had Ronald Reagan and a Democrat House and Senate. They did tax reform. Not everything they did was perfect, but they did get some major legislation done. They did Social Security reform. You look at the 90s, you had Clinton and Newt Gingrich and Bob Hope from Kansas. They certainly weren't friends with Clinton. I mean, they were impeaching him, if you recall. But they were able to get some things done. They balanced the budget 4 times in the 90s. 4 out of the 6 times. We've only balanced the budget 6 times in 50 years. So 4 of them were in the 90s. That tells me we've got a bipartisan problem. It's going to take both parties to be more fiscally responsible, both Democrats and Republicans. Both of them have spent more money than they have. And so you have great examples of where the parties have worked together. And I'm disappointed, and I continue to look for ways to be part of the solution. And I will continue to do that. Look, I didn't sign the Grover Norquist pledge. Okay? Not because I think you're out to raise taxes. But I believe in being open-minded and being able to listen to everybody. And you know me, I'm not a fan of tax increases, but I am a fan of working together and doing what we can to get things done. Okay, so I'll commit that to you, sir. Now the issue regarding the debt ceiling. The biggest argument in 2011, when I voted against the debt ceiling increase, the biggest argument the proponents were saying at that time was that we had to borrow money in order to pay down our debt. Remember that? We were going to default on our debt. We're going to default on our bonds if we didn't borrow money. We bring in enough money every day, by the way, to pay our debt interest, to pay our Social Security, to pay our veterans payments, to pay all those things. So this is being used as a wedge beyond just those issues. You think about this debt, borrowing to pay down debt situation. Think about an individual that has taken out several credit cards, and those minimum payments are coming due, and they can't afford to make the minimum payments. But voila, a new credit card application comes in the mail. You all gotten credit card applications in the mail, and it says, we can give you a cash advance. We can take that cash advance, and you can pay down your 3 minimum payments. But now you got 4 credit cards. And you can do it again, and you can do it again. Most people here would love to go to the banker and keep getting unlimited debt ceiling increases. Just call the banker, hey, bank, I need another debt ceiling increase. And over time, you get to a point where us as individuals would go bankrupt, and our nation is heading to a point, as I discussed earlier, where our debt and interest payments are so great that even if you're someone who thinks we're not spending enough and you want to spend more on healthcare, education, that money's going to be crowded out. Those investments are going to be crowded out because we're spending so much money on debt and interest. So we can avoid that today, and we ought to avoid that today. I've supported legislation. I've supported legislation that would agree that no matter what happens, we always pay our debt and interest payments. It's called the Full Faith and Credit Act. To say that if we get into this debate, debt and interest always gets paid. That would take it off the table. We can't get the administration to support that. You know why? Because they want to use the debt ceiling as a wedge so you have to spend more money. The debt ceiling is not being raised to the end of the fiscal year. That would make your point, sir. They're asking to have the debt ceiling be raised $2 to $3 trillion, which would take us into several years. That's money we haven't even appropriated yet. So it is, I hear that a lot. And I've heard it from the Kansas City Star editorial board. I've heard it from folks to say, well, this is just for money we've already spent. That's not correct. If this debt ceiling ended next fiscal year, we borrow every year, that might be an argument. But it isn't. It's to go into several years. And so I can't borrow money in the names of the people in this community, and that's I can come back to you and tell you how we're going to pay it back. Okay? There may have to be some type of debt increase. We borrow 40 cents out of every dollar. Every dollar we spend is 40 cents. I said earlier, I don't advocate 40% cut to the federal budget overnight. I advocate a smart approach, a 10-year pathway to get to a balanced budget. And then we hold the line, put a balanced budget amendment in place, and we never get back in this situation again. We got time for one last question.
Back in 2006, Joe Biden spoke about putting together an impeachment process for President Bush if he invaded Iran. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but in 2006 he did that. So and I don't think this is the only opportunity that we have to impeach President Obama, but if he does anything in retaliation without going to Congress first, do you support the impeachment process?
I will tell you, every day is a new day when it comes to this administration and their breaches of the American trust and their failure to listen to the American people. Whether it comes to not enforcing laws that are on the books, which we've seen time and time again, whether we've seen these things. I will tell you there are standards involved that determine whether someone should be impeached or not. I don't believe this president should be impeached at this point. Okay? And I made this point from my fans. I'm an open-minded guy. We don't agree on everything. I don't think we're at that point. I don't want us to be in a country where whatever happens, the other side says the other president's a liar, he's a war criminal, those 5 people died, heard all, they're going to impeach him. I don't want to live in that country. But I do want, elections have consequences, folks. The president won it. But I want to do everything I can to use my voice and my vote to stand up for this community, this 3rd district. Now, if the president reaches the point where we think he's committed high crimes and misdemeanors, then we'll go to that point. And some people I know already think that. But it's my job. I represent a community full of Democrats, Independents, Republicans, Libertarians, every walk of life in this community, and it's my job to represent them all. So I'm going to use constitutional powers like that very diligently, and only in the cases in which it's definitely needed. We can't go into a country where the losing party always tries to impeach the president. Okay? But that doesn't mean I like what this president's doing. That doesn't mean we're not going to hold his feet to the fire. That doesn't mean that I've already called an Eric Holder's resignation, and we'll continue to do all those things. And I don't know where this is going. But I don't think we're there. And I know many of you are, and that's fine. We're going to continue to have that debate. I don't think we're there, but we're going to continue to do everything we can to speak up and stand out on the causes that the people of Kansas believe in. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate the conversation.